So Arizona Governor Doug Ducey recently made his, I think it was his 8th and final State of the State address, and he said something really interesting. Does anyone know what Governor Ducey said? Did you hear what he said? I'm going to read his words here. He said, 50 years ago, politicians stood in the schoolhouse door and wouldn't let minorities in. Today, union-backed politicians stand in the schoolhouse door and won't let minorities out. Many of our poor kids and children of color are trapped in a failing school. It's time to set these families free. So Terris, if you could, what strong words coming from a governor, right? Terris, we'll start with you. What work have you seen done in the Department of Education and through your work in the African American Academic Excellence Office? What strides have we taken as a public education system to try to create opportunities for families?
Well, first and foremost, school choice is the greatest thing ever. To give families the choice because, again, let's be honest, I mean, at some point in time in this country, African-American students didn't have choice, you know what I mean? And so to now lock them down into a system that's failing is totally immoral, and quite frankly, it is racist. Racism is tied to economics, and so, and if education is the great equalizer to a better lifestyle in the future towards a great career, locking them down is absolutely a racist act. And so some of the work that we've seen, though, I think I see homeschooling actually starting to increase all over the country, in particular in the state of Florida. When myself and my colleague, Katie Gorka, had come to Florida to the homeschool convention there, we realized that the numbers of African-American families that are now starting to homeschool is growing, and quite frankly, it should. Because if you are not satisfied with where your children are, then find and pray a way to God that you're able to actually homeschool them, so that way you can control what goes into your child's brain. Again, it was said earlier, train up a child in the way that he should go, and when he gets old, he won't depart from it. It didn't say to hand them off to the government to do that.
That's right.
You get what I'm saying? So I would love to see that a little bit more. I would love to see that more families are starting to really homeschool, to be honest with you. And that's some of the things that I've actually acknowledged during my time at the Department of Ed, that homeschooling was now this trend that's actually growing amongst African-American families. So keep it up the good work on that one.
I'm going to then go to Erika, because Erika, I wanted to ask you, in your role as a school board member, you know, Governor Ducey talks about union-backed politicians. What role is the union playing in keeping students locked in schools?
Well, I want to shout out to Rebecca Friedrichs, because her book about standing against Goliath, sorry, I don't know the name, but she's amazing, and her book really tells you some great stories about this. But as a school board member, I certainly experienced this, and there's a particular story that I like to tell about why unions are the biggest enemy to quality public education in our country. When I was a school board member, I negotiated, as a minority member, about $7.5 million, a pot of money, to get the highest quality veteran teachers to go out to an area of our county called Immokalee, Florida, high poverty, very low income, transient community, and almost 80-90% minority in each one of those schools, and many of those schools failing. But the most important metric in those schools was that out of all of the teachers in our county, 20% of the teachers in Immokalee were brand new. 20%. The rest of the county, that figure was only 6%. And so my goal was to even that out. Now, how do we get more veteran teachers out into Immokalee, high-performing teachers? Well, how do you do that? You incentivize them, right? It's far. It's like a 45-minute drive for most of us to get out there. And so what I wanted to do is do a progressive bonus system. So they'd get $1,000 the first year, $3,000 the second year, $5,000 the third year, to get them out there and have them stay for at least 3 years. And it would only be available to veteran, high-performing teachers. And I actually got the rest of the school board to agree on that. But once that proposal went to the bargaining table, what came back was $2,500 for every single teacher that teaches in Immokalee, no matter their performance, no matter how long they'd been teaching, $2,500 for 1 year. So what did that do to the number that we were trying to move? What did that do to the 20% of brand new teachers that were in Immokalee versus 6% for the rest of the county? Absolutely nothing. And we could have done it if not for being blocked by the unions. And so the unions don't have children's interests first, because if they did, they would allow us to incentivize hard-to-staff positions like math and science to get people from the professions to come in and teach our children those things, in our high schools especially. And they would allow us to incentivize teachers, the best teachers, to go teach in the hardest-to-teach schools with additional compensation. And they won't allow it, not in my district and not in any district. And that's racist. It truly is.
Tony, what's your experience been like with unions in schools? You've worked as a teacher and as an administrator in the system. What's that been like for you?
So as of last week, I've convinced my 115th teacher to leave the Indiana State Teachers Association. And had the opportunity by accident to stand next to the executive director of the Indiana State Teachers Association at the last time I testified before the Senate, and he was really unhappy I was standing next to him. And I think the reason is because we charge our teachers in Indiana $700 annually. In many other states, it's between $1,200 and $1,500 annually, that amount of money to do absolutely nothing. And Todd, the Attorney General in Indiana, enjoys rubbing this in because he sends a letter out to every teacher in the state of Indiana at the beginning of the year saying that we will represent you as a state, because you're a state employee, in any lawsuit that you find yourself in. And that's the only thing the union really has going for it, other than collective bargaining, which they do horribly. They injected themselves into my textbook adoption committee for the Indianapolis public school system. They made a separate racial equity group that had to approve all of my decisions for the textbook adoption committee. Notably, no one on that committee, the racial equity committee, could actually speak Spanish. None of them had ever worked in any of the Midwestern Hispanic communities, so like the most critical race theorists, they're completely ignoring the Hispanic population of this country. They have in no way, shape, or form worked on achieving STEM in any way, shape, or form in our school system or in the surrounding Indianapolis systems. But the union says they have to be there. So despite the fact that they're inexperienced, despite the fact that they're incredibly politically biased, and despite the fact that they didn't read any of the material that I sent them while I was at the district, they still had incredible power. And I found that rather disgruntling, to say the least. But that's what's happening all over the state. It's happening all over the country. It's individuals who feel that their cushy time getting to sit in chairs on the backs of teachers' salary and on the backs of school fund mismanagement, they feel threatened that we want to take a second look at what they're teaching, how they're doing it, and how they're being paid for it. And that's unacceptable.
So, Paul, I know that you worked in the private school system, but I know you've written a little bit about a lot of the peer pressure within the school environment amongst teachers and in the curriculum. So if you just want to talk a little bit about, and maybe any advice for teachers in the audience about, you took a real stand in your school, and I know that was very difficult to do.
Yeah, it's different, of course, in private schools. And in my school and many of the schools, in New York City, teachers have a year contract. And unless you run afoul of, if you get too many parent complaints, or you just become unpopular, or someone anathema to the community, however that's defined, you're fine. There's an expectation that they'll give you another contract, year to year to year. And there are teachers there that have been there a very long time. They're very happy. They're very satisfied. Administration is satisfied with them. But the pressure, because of the lack of collective bargaining arrangements, you are vulnerable, and you are susceptible to a tremendous amount of pressure of trying to dance to the tune of the administration, or else you're deemed not a good fit. And they'll have that conversation with you. They'll say, are you happy here? Perhaps you want to go in a different direction. Perhaps this is not the place for you. Now, in my case, there are no other places for me because it's endemic throughout the system. There's a market, right? But what we have in private education among the 1,600 National Association of Independent Schools is a cartel. They are entirely, they have accreditors in 25 regions across the country, and they're all running from the same playbook. And that playbook is that woke DEI is de rigueur. You cannot take a different path. And there's a whole nexus of consultancies and self-dealing boards in relation to those consultancies where you really are trapped. Now, of course, there is a market. I can go teach at a small school. There are great schools. People have approached me and said, we'd love to have you, and that's great. But it is, I guess I would call it like a half cartel. among this group. And the thing that's even stranger about this and more disturbing is that, these wokeness is the religion of the elite, okay? And these schools are going to pass people on to the Harvard, Yale, the Ivies, these schools, and they are the ones that are going to be taking over the technocratic management of what James was talking about, the bureaucratic interposition and management. These are the people that are going to be on the Department of Anti-Racism. And a fish rots from the head, too. A lot of times, these schools were the skunk works, the laboratories for the implementations of these policies. We were doing this back in 2012, and many places even earlier. So that's my sort of assessment of the broad picture of what it's like, what it was like at my schools and many similar schools.